Hey there, Sleeping Beauty. We're going to a cemetery today because we have someone in the Elvis community that we haven't visited yet that definitely needs our appreciation. You up for that, Ja? You want to go too? I said, do you want to go too? All right. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all begins now. In Cox County, which is basically north of Jackson, Tennessee, north of Humboldt, Tennessee, kind of in between Nashville and Memphis. We're here to see the great Scotty Moore. What an amazing showing of respect here. It is a very small church cemetery, but as you'll notice, they have a historical plaque here, and it tells about Scotty. It says, Coxville Church and Winfield Scotty Moore. With 1874 land grants, Nita Moore, D.H. James, and James Alexander Cox, all descendants of Moses Cox, for whom Coxville was named, the original trustees established the Cox Chapel Church of Christ and Cemetery. All three are interred here along with Winfield Scotty Moore III, the great-grandson of Nita Moore. Scotty Moore is credited with discovering Elvis Presley and playing guitar on his first hit, That's All Right Mama, recorded at Sun Records in Memphis, Tennessee on July 5th, 1954. His lead guitar back up to Elvis over the years led to his induction in both the Musicians and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, that's a pretty good setup, although there's a lot more to it than that, because not only is he in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he was the very first sideman ever inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which means he wasn't a full-fledged member of the band. However, he was a musician in the group that was deemed so important that he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it says that he discovered Elvis. That might be an accurate statement, actually. I was told that he's buried here towards the back in a very unassuming plot. The reason I say that that is kind of true is because even though Sam Phillips gets the credit for kind of discovering and making Elvis a star, which he did, it was actually Sam's assistant, his secretary, Marion Kiesler, who heard Elvis. Elvis came in and she said, "Who do you sound like?" And he said, "I don't sound like anybody." Boy, was he right. That's what definitely distinguished Elvis from everyone else at the time. His amazing blend of gospel, rhythm and blues, and country music, which thrown in there, all that combined created rock and roll, and he became the king of rock and roll. She heard his music, thought maybe he had something. Sam had heard him before, wasn't impressed. But what happened was Elvis went to Scotty Moore's apartment in Memphis, and it was actually July 4th, the day before that famous recording, and he showed up and asked Scotty to, help him. And so Scotty Moore at the time, his story was that he had been in the Navy. He was a guitar player, great guitar player. Even then, he said he would play in the Navy all you could get with Japanese guitars. So he played a Japanese guitar in the Navy. And then the very first thing he did when he got out, he said he went and got himself a Fender. And he played the Fender for a while. But he said then one day he was walking past a piano store in Memphis, and he said he didn't know what it was, but it was this big gold guitar, and he walked in, told him he had to have it. So he said he struck up a deal to trade in his Fender for that guitar. That was the famous Gibson 295. It was kind of like an oversized Les Paul copy, and that would be a big part of their sound. Now, he had a band at the time in town, because he said when he came out of the Navy, he said there weren't really bands in Memphis. He said he would go around to different venues and say, "Hey, do you have a band playing this week?" And if they said no, he'd say, "You want one?" And if they said yes, he would call musicians that he knew in town and he would just randomly put something together. He said they wouldn't even have a name. It would just be for the money and to get out to play. And so because of this, he said he kind of got tired of trying to constantly wrangle up different guys. He created a band and managed it called Starlight Wranglers. And so Starlight Wranglers were playing around Memphis, and Elvis knew of them as well. So when Elvis came to his apartment that day and they started jamming together, Scotty immediately saw something in Elvis. And Scotty had in his band, Bill Black, and Bill lived just a few doors down. So he had Bill come over, and Bill liked what he heard as well. So it was Scotty Moore that called Sam Phillips and said, Sam, I got a guy here. I think he's different. I think he's got something. And so it wasn't a recording session that they were invited to at Sun Records on the 5th. It was an audition. And so they worked up a few songs, and Scotty said the first thing that really impressed him about Elvis was that no matter what song you named, even if Elvis couldn't play it on guitar, he could sing it. If somebody else started playing it, like if Bill started playing it or Scotty started playing it, Elvis wouldn't miss a beat. And they said Elvis was, he was a pretty good guitar player because, back in those days they didn't use drummers. So it was Elvis on rhythm guitar, Scotty Moore on lead guitar, and Bill on upright bass. And he said Elvis just beat that guitar. He said he didn't strum it. He beat that thing till the strings would break. So Scotty is actually located all the way back at the very back of the cemetery, the very last headstone. You'll see a kind of a bigger one back here. He's actually right next to it on the ground, and he has 2 headstones because, as I mentioned, he was in the Navy, so he has a naval headstone that is right down here. And then his main headstone right over here. I'm just trying to keep my shadow off of them. Here you can see part of it's covered up, but it says Winfield Scott Moore, U.S. Navy, Korea, born December 27th, 1931, died June 28th, 2016. So sad. This guy influenced so many people. I mean, Keith Richards alone said, yeah, if you loved singing, if you were a singer, you loved Elvis Presley. But if you were a guitar player, you wanted to be Scotty Moore. There's the grave of Scotty Moore. You can see someone's left a guitar, black guitar up there for him. Some black roses. Yeah, Scotty said once he started playing Gibson, he never turned back. So they went to Sun Records on July 5th. They had worked up the songs that they were going to perform and showcase for Sam. They start doing it, and they're working on one of their ballads because they thought that would feature Elvis's voice the best, and he was having some trouble, and things weren't going so great, so they turned the radio on as kind of a break, and That's All Right Mama was on. And so the band just started goofing around, and Elvis started singing it, and Scotty started figuring out how to play it. Bill kind of knew it, so Bill started playing it. And before they knew it, Sam was like, "What are you guys doing?" He said, "Oh, we're just messing around." He goes, "Well, whatever that messing around is sounds pretty good." And Scotty said that was when they realized that Sam liked the beat that they were coming up with. And so they recorded those Sun recordings. And right after, and I mean, the story that we always hear is basically, hey, they recorded the songs and then became superstars. But that's not really true, because right after that, there wasn't a whole lot going on before the release came out. So Scotty was still playing gigs and would invite Elvis to sit in for the gigs. And so there were other musicians at the time that didn't like Elvis because Elvis was so different. But Scotty said that's what he was drawn to with Elvis, was that he just sounded different and thought of music differently. So he said he would invite Elvis to sit in, and basically it would be the Starlight Wranglers playing, and then Elvis would play, and Scotty and Bill would back him up. And they had already done the audition and everything. And Bill said, hey, I don't think this is going to work. And Scotty's like, why? You don't like the sound? He goes, no, I like the sound, but we got to take a break. Like we're playing the whole night when we play these shows. But as we know, eventually the record came out. Elvis took off. They became his touring band. And at the time, bands didn't have drummers. And the crowds became so big and so loud that Scotty said that they had to take on a drummer, which was DJ Fontana, and add him to the group because he said it was so loud we couldn't hear Elvis's rhythm parts. Or he said Elvis would be banging on that guitar so hard and so loud that he would break the strings. And, by the end of the show, he might only have one string left. So they took on a drummer, and the rest became the Elvis Presley phenomenon. They would play with Elvis from Sun Records into RCA. And one of the things that I loved so much was hearing Scotty tell stories about how Elvis really stuck up for his band. Back in those days, if you released an album as Elvis Presley, you were the star. It wasn't Elvis Presley and his band, it was Elvis Presley. So a lot of musicians and performers of that day would just want a backup band that were basically mannequins that could play the instruments. But that wasn't Elvis. Scotty would actually say that Elvis was nervous on stage. So all the gyrating hips and the shaking and everything that made him famous, and the Ed Sullivan where they only wanted to film him from the waist up and all that stuff, that came from nerves. He was just out there having fun and working off the nerves and everything. But he said that, Elvis supported like Scotty being animated on stage. He said Bill would make all kinds of like crazy funny faces and was just a funny guy in general. And so Elvis liked that because it took some of the pressure off of him. It became a whole show that everybody, got to put their part in. And he also said when we went to RCA, Chet Atkins was pretty much the head of RCA and produced everything. And, when we went there, he immediately kind of started telling me different things and ways I should play and offering different guitars and stuff like that. And he said Elvis kind of stepped in for me and said, hey, no offense, Mr. Atkins, but my guitar player is my guitar player for a reason. I don't want him to not sound like my guitar player, so please let him play the way he plays. And which I thought was amazing. And Scotty had all kinds of just really incredible stories of playing with Elvis. I didn't hear any negative stories. It was always Elvis supporting, what they were doing, their creative input in the music. And, it was basically when he went off and joined the service that they all quit playing together. Elvis, of course, was drafted and then came out and was doing the movies and everything, but they did come back when the comeback special was going to be recorded. Elvis hadn't performed like that in a long time, and he was really nervous. And so it was said that the Colonel had the idea of, hey, why don't we ask, some people even say it was Elvis's idea, but they said, why don't we get the original band members to come back and help support Elvis for this? And of course, they were hurt because they had always been Elvis's band and they wanted to continue being Elvis's band, but time moved on, and they said even though they were kind of sore at the Colonel, they would never do anything against Elvis. And so they said they wanted Elvis to have a great comeback. And so they agreed to be part of it. Now, Scotty was with Elvis from the very beginning in 1954 till about 68. And James Burton's told the story several times about getting a call from Elvis and basically being on the phone with him for hours and Elvis offering him the job being his new guitar player, and that James Burton had to call Rick Nelson and tell him, I'm leaving for Elvis. But Scotty Moore had a great career. He was credited as being the inventor of the power chord in Jailhouse Rock, which is, I can't even imagine rock and roll guitar without it. But it was Keith Richards who actually has said, when I heard Heartbreak Hotel, I knew what I wanted to do in life. It was as plain as day. All I wanted to do in the world was to be able to play and sound like the way Scotty Moore did. Everyone wanted to be Elvis, but I wanted to be Scotty. Pretty big compliment. When people would ask Scotty how much Elvis would, you know, kind of direct him as to what he wanted his sound to be, Scotty would always say, you know, Elvis let me do whatever I want. He said the only thing, if ever, that he ever said was, you know, hey, can you play that a little slower or can you play that a little faster? But he said as far as the creative input, the notes, the licks, anything that I came up with, if I was happy with it, Elvis was happy with it. The word guitar legend can sometimes be overused, but I think in Scotty Moore's case and Les Paul's case, people like that, it is solely earned. I mean, Scotty Moore, even though, you know, Elvis may have been a star, probably would have been discovered in some other way, I always feel like God has a hand in making things happen the right way. And had he not went to Scotty, and had Scotty not made that call, had Scotty not been his guitar player, who knows? Scotty recounted the session by saying, all of a sudden, Elvis just started singing the song, jumping around and acting the fool, and then Bill picked up his bass and he started acting the fool too. And then I started playing with him. Sam, I think, had the door to the control booth open. He stuck his head out and said, what are you doing? We said, we don't know. We'll back up, he said. Try to find a place to start and do it again. Phillips quickly began taping, as this was the sound he had been looking for. They may never have done Blue Moon of Kentucky on the Grand Ole Opry, which was kind of humbling experience. Somebody actually, one of the performers, after Elvis performed, came up to him and said, well, time to get back to driving that truck, boy. And I mean, for someone who eventually became the biggest star in the world, the king of rock and roll, to have someone say that after a show, it was said that his whole drive back to Memphis, he was sad and kind of took it to heart. It really hurt his feelings. But Scotty Moore, you know, would say, like, Elvis never let that stuff in the long term affect him. He had a sound, and thank God he had a sound in his head that he didn't let anybody alter, because that is what made Elvis the special performer that he was. And if you've ever seen that guitar that Elvis used to play that had his name in the neck of the guitar, that was actually thanks to Scotty. Scotty had arranged a deal with Gibson where they were going to send him a prototype guitar, and he wanted to gift it to Elvis. And so he said when Elvis had banged on it enough and the finish was coming up, he sent it back to Gibson and said, hey, can you guys, you know, refinish this and add his name to the neck? And so a lot of people say that that was the first time in rock and roll that anybody had their name on the neck of a guitar. But Scotty said there was actually a mistake, because he said he sent that guitar and it had a number. And he said, and then when he called to find out, you know, he was going to be kind of nearby and wanted to get the guitar eventually, and said, hey, you know, can you guys send it? He said that when he got the guitar back, it had a different number. And so he thought that was a little bit strange, and then he checked with them, found out they made a second guitar while they had that guitar, an exact replica, and sent it to Memphis. So there are actually two of those guitars, one that was the original that Scotty had gifted to Elvis and that Elvis would play on the comeback special, and then there's an additional that was accidentally made that's floating around that Scotty Moore believed Graceland has. So Mr. Scotty Moore, you are in fact, indeed, a king of rock and roll. Thank you for your military service in Korea. Thank you for your rock and roll service. Thank you for helping to bring about the iconic career that was Elvis Presley. And all of us Elvis fans love you and always will love your story, your contribution, and your music. Rest in peace, Winfield Scotty Moore III. TCB.